Hello everyone, Pastor Howie here. Today is Friday, July the 8th, 2022, and I have some scriptures and some words from the Celtic Daily Prayer book for you today. The scriptures are Psalm 122 verse 2, so we're going to take our time in July going through the Psalms of Ascents, and so we're taking these short little psalms in little bits and pieces. Ezra chapter 3 verses 11 through 13. Remember, Ezra is written in the context of the Jewish people returning from Babylonian captivity and trying to rebuild what God through Solomon had built in the temple, and what had been ruined as a result of God's chastisement upon a rebellious, overly religious, superstitious people that professed God with their lips, but their hearts were far from him. And warning after warning after warning went unheeded until God took away the 10 northern tribes to the Assyrian Empire, never to return, and then brought the Babylonians to take captives from Jerusalem and Judah to return 70 years later. And we'll see that some of the people that did return remembered the former temple. And then a reading from Luke chapter 19, verses 12 through 26, which instructs us parabolically on how we should deal with the things that God has given to us and trusted to us as stewards, and what the consequences are for those who just bury the things that God has given to us. So let's begin. Psalm 122, remember, is the Psalm of David. Verse 2 says, "Our feet are standing in your gates, Jerusalem." So obviously this song of ascents was written before the Babylonian captivity. If it was written by David, he lived a long time before God brought his chastising discipline against Jerusalem and Judea. But David loved being in the house of God. David loved being in the city of God. And I think that we should be people that follow David's example. We're saved by grace, the grace of God, invited to participate in the building project of Christ, which is his church, the kingdom of heaven, displayed in this world, in the gatherings of little communities of believers all over the world. Then we should rejoice, and we should find ourselves standing in the gates of spiritual Jerusalem, so to speak. We come to Ezra 3. These people found themselves returning from the Babylonian captivity. Certainly newer and younger people who were raised in Babylon, and also some elders who saw the former glory. And they find themselves standing in the gates of Jerusalem, and they find some sorrow, as well as those finding rejoicing. With praise and thanksgiving they sang to the Lord, Ezra writes. He is good. His love toward Israel endures forever. And that song comes from probably more than one psalm in the book of Psalms that reminds us that God's love endures forever. God's mercy endures forever. So they were singing these songs, rejoicing that God had brought them back to Jerusalem, and allowed them and gave them resources even through the secular kings of Babylon, the Median and Persian Empire, resources to rebuild. But they rejoiced. And then Ezra tells us, and all the people gave a great shout of praise to the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. So they'd gotten to a certain step. They poured the foundation, if you will. It was actually laid in stones, I'm sure, not in concrete. But many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple. Now you got to understand, if this is at the end of 70 years of captivity, these people saw the former temple when they were children. But they remembered it, and they were told about it. And so here they are beholding this foundation that had been laid. And they wept aloud when they saw the foundation of this temple being laid, while many others shouted for joy. No one could distinguish the sound of the shouts of joy from the sound of weeping, because the people made so much noise, and the sound was heard far away. So the people who were standing against them, the people who were part of the land that the Babylonians had brought in to people the land, they heard these things. They couldn't distinguish between the sounds of joy and the sounds of weeping, but the sound of weeping was there as people remembered the former glory. And you know, I think that that's sometimes a case in my own heart. I've only been a follower of Christ, I've been a follower of Christ for 49 years. And I remember 49 years ago that when I started going to church, and that wasn't 49 years ago, but when I started going to church finally in 1975, and God got a hold of my heart, and I made an actual commitment to not only Jesus, but to Him and to His church. We had Sunday school, and the classes were filled. We had a morning worship service that the house was pretty full. We had an evening training union. The Southern Baptist Convention had an evening Sunday school, and they called it training union. It was more of a discipleship class type thing. A Sunday evening worship service, which was a little less formal, but still the house was pretty full. We had prayer meeting on Wednesday evenings, and the house was still pretty full. Didn't matter what the temperature was, didn't matter what season it was. People assembled. Today, that's not so true. And so I think about those things. I'm glad to be pastoring a church that is alive and that is growing, I hope and believe, more deeply in relationship to Christ, if not in numbers. I'm glad to have a church that is, or pastoring a church that is able to sustain itself through the tithes and gifts of the people. I'm glad that I'm part of a church that not only survived the pandemic, but we in a sense thrived. We learned how to reach out. I'm glad. But I still look back and say, the way church is done today, in many places, even my home church, is just not the same as it used to be. And so there is some grief, but there's joy. There's joy every time we stand in the gates of spiritual Jerusalem, the church, the assembly, the get-togethers, the Bible studies, whatever it might be, and there should be. And when we gather together to become equipped and to help one another to grow in Christ, and therefore grow in our influence in this world as what Jesus calls salt and light. We are the light of the world. We are the only people on the face of this earth who can dispense the spiritual, moral darkness of the world. And we are the only people in this world who can preserve and season the cultures of this world. The other religions may feel like they're influential, but mostly they're not. But Christ left us here to be representatives of His light and representatives of His healing and preserving and seasoning in culture. And He's equipped us. And so when we come to Luke, Jesus is talking about, in a parabolic form, people who have been gifted, and we're going to be studying spiritual gifts, and I'm going to be preaching about spiritual gifts starting Sunday. But he's talking about people who are gifted by the king and accountable to the king. And when the accounting has taken place, we'll see that there are some who took what the king gave to them and made profit of that, and others that just didn't. And the consequences are interesting. Luke 19:12 through 26. He said, that is Jesus in teaching this parable, a man of noble birth went to a distant country to have himself appointed king and then to return. So he called 10 of his servants and gave them 10 minas. Now, just for your information, a mina was about 3 months' worth of wage. It's a lot of money in today's economy. Put this money to work, he said, until I come back. But his subjects hated him and sent a delegation after him to say, we don't want this man to be our king. He was made king, however, and returned home. Then he sent for the servants to whom he had given the money, in order to find out what they had gained with it. The first one came and said, Sir, your mina has earned 10 more. Well done, my good servant, his master said. Because you have been trustworthy in a very small matter, take charge of 10 cities. The second came and said, Sir, your mina has earned 5 more. His master answered, You take charge of 5 cities. Then another servant came and said, Sir, here is your mina. I have kept it laid away in a piece of cloth. He's a caretaker. I was afraid of you because you are a hard man. You take out what you did not put in and reap what you did not sow. His master replied, I will judge you by your own words, you wicked servant. You knew, did you, that I am a hard man, taking out what I did not put in and reaping what I did not sow. Why then didn't you put my money on deposit so that when I came back, I could have collected it with interest? Then he said to those standing by, Take his mina away from him and give it to the one who has 10 minas. Sir, they replied, he already has 10. He replied, I tell you that everyone who has, more will be given. But as for the one who has nothing, even what they have will be taken away. What do we have that King Jesus has given to us? We'll explore that as we explore gifts, spiritual gifts in particular. But the question is, what has God given us? And what have we done with it? Or what are we doing with it? Do we think he just gave it to us like a semi-senile grandparent who just gives away things to his grandchildren with no accountability? Or did he give it to us, and does he hold us accountable with what he has given us? We need to think about that. This is it for this week. It's what I have for you. I just realized as I was reading these things that once again I forgot to post these scriptures. I will post them right after I'm finished. We'll see you Sunday morning at 9:30. Brenda and I back from vacation, so I'm anxious to get back with the people of Fowler Baptist Church. And we'll see you then. God bless your day.